Welcome everybody to this video by Dr. Lisa Love on the 10 Evolutionary Groups, How Humans Evolve as Understood by a woman named Alice Bailey. And in this particular video, we're going to move to Group 6. And there's so much to say about this group that I've had to divide it into two parts. So this is part 1, where we're going to look at stage 1, the materialist. As a reminder, if you haven't watched the other videos, I say this at the beginning of every video, Alice Bailey has 10 evolutionary groups in general, which are general divisions attempting to show how humans progress from their baser animal instincts, where they are focused mainly on surviving and procreating, to the point where they know who they are as spiritual beings and live accordingly. And according to Alice Bailey, humans of all 10 groups are said to live among us. And those in the first 6 groups are primarily focused on becoming human. And groups 7 and 8 are focused on becoming soul. Groups 9 and 10 on becoming spirit. So this is the last group in the 6 groups that are assigned to her 3 main stages. Becoming human, I call it becoming soul, becoming spirit. She calls it becoming the integrated personality, becoming the soul-infused personality, and becoming the monad. But what we have here is the final group that we are looking at, Group 6. But remember that all of these groups focus on the realm of the 5 senses. They get up in the morning, and what is real is pretty much what they see out there through the 5 senses. They are also gaining sufficient mastery or manipulation of the body, emotions, and mind for purpose of exploiting the outer world of the 5 senses. And they progress from very little mastery at Group 1 to excessive mastery at Group 6. And that's exactly where we are in this particular video, where we are nearing the end of this very long evolutionary stage of becoming human, what Bailey calls the integrated personality, or the path of individuation. Now, this Group 6 is still focused in Atlantean consciousness, which has nothing to do with the city of Atlantis that Plato talks about that sunk somewhere. It has to do with a particular state of consciousness, which I've talked about in my previous videos, that is focused primarily on desire. So, this is the model of Alice Bailey that she uses right here. And this is a colored version that I made of it. These colors were not assigned by her. These are my own color assignments. And I have highlighted these different stages on her chart through these blue triangles that I have created. And the first one that you really need to focus on is the idea that we are on the emotional plane, where we are also trying to become the personality. And Group 6 is the emerging cream of humanity, Alice Bailey says, and is steadily increasing in number, and there's the reference for that. And here's what I was trying to get to before, this idea that Group 6 is at the top levels of the emotional plane. Now, Alice Bailey does not assign exactly where these groups are, but I have plenty of references that indicate very thoroughly that groups 1 through 6, which have Lemurian and Atlantean consciousness, would reside on the emotional plane. And it is my idea that Group 6 would be somewhere in these top 2 subplanes. There are 7 planes within each one of these 7 levels in her chart. And they might be somewhere on the lower level of the mental plane, but for the most part, I am putting them here, and that is my distinction. That is not found in her books. So what they are doing is they are working primarily on becoming the personality. Now you see that this triangle goes a little bit above, just like in her chart. You see this little bracket here, and notice how it goes a little bit above the emotional plane, all the way up to this dotted line through what she calls the planes of the lower mind. That's this section here. The plane of the solar angel is here, and this is her egoic lotus, or soul is another way that you could look at it. That is because when we reach these levels, we are becoming the soul-infused personality, and that is something that groups 7 and 8 are working on. So again, groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are pretty much either within the top levels of the physical plane, but almost all of them are going through the emotional plane, and maybe group 6 is coming up here, which I did in this circle a little bit into the lower levels of the mental plane in her chart. All right, so Alice Bailey has a great deal to say about this group and some of the groups beyond group 6. When I did the videos on groups 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, she had much less to say. And so I had to kind of fill it in with the compilations that I made on different things that she had to say, not only about those groups, but the different states of consciousness, Lemurian, Atlantean, and so forth. In this particular video, I am going to be referencing her quotes extensively, precisely because she has so much to say about these particular groups, especially group 6, 7, and 8 in her model. So it's important to understand that the integrated personality has two major tasks it needs to complete. And that's the word, complete, not start, complete. And before we get into what those are, let's read from Alice Bailey herself. Just what do we mean by integration? We are apt to bandy words about with unthinking lightness and inexactitude, but dealing as we are with the development which is becoming increasingly prevalent in the human field, it might profit us for a moment to define it and to seek to understand one or two of its major implications. It has to be regarded as an essential step prior to passing in full and waking consciousness into the fifth or spiritual kingdom. We regard the physical body as a functioning aggregate of physical organs, each with its own duties and purposes. These, when combined and acting in unison, we regard as constituting a living organism. The many parts form one whole, working under the direction of the intelligent, conscious thinker, the soul, as far as man is concerned. And there is the reference to where the quote comes from Esoteric Psychology, Volume 2, page 348. Now, there's an important thing in this quote that you're going to hear me say throughout this video. Becoming an integrated personality is an essential step. We cannot skip stages. We may try, we may, jump over them. And then, like I've said in other videos, like the Chutes and Ladders game, we go up really fast, but then we go beyond our reach and we come down. And so the actual path of spiritual progress is more like this. It's not really a spiral going up. It's more kind of an up and down process. And eventually we stabilize more and more at the higher levels. But as you hear through this video about what the integrated personality is like, especially at the materialist stage of it, you may want to go, oh gosh, no, I don't want to have anything to do with some of this stuff, because we're going to hear things like they're selfish and so forth. And yet it is absolutely essential that we all understand that we can't skip stages. These are all essential steps prior to passing in full and waking consciousness. That means we have to know what we're doing here into what she calls the fifth or spiritual kingdom. So the integrated personality, by integrating within, has to integrate the mental, the emotional, the vital or etheric body, and the physical body together into a coordinated unit for the purposes which we are going to explore more in this video. Now, regarding the above quote, or the quote on the previous slide, I would like to make a few clarifications, since Bailey's language can be very difficult to connect with. First, Bailey views becoming an integrated personality, as I already said, as an essential step. Second, we have to become integrated in full and waking consciousness. Again, that means we need to know what we're doing. We have to understand the requirements, and we have to consciously fulfill all the requirements. Otherwise, we'll have gaps, or what she calls cleavages, in development, and that's what causes that kind of up and down thing. And she also says we only then will pass into the fifth or spiritual kingdom. Now, that might be a strange phrase. It's not a phrase that we use much. Remember, she started writing her books in 1919. That's over 100 years ago. She finished in the 1940s and wrote most of her books in the 1920s and especially the 1930s. So we're talking language that might seem strange to us right now. So I'm going to try and help clarify that for you. So this phrase, spiritual kingdom, may be new to you. reading this book. I took this from the book Becoming Human that I've written. So let me quickly share how in the Bailey teachings 5 kingdoms are said to exist. So here are 5 kingdoms, and she calls them mineral, plant, animal, human, and spirit. So we don't necessarily use this idea of kingdoms anymore, but we can look out at our world and basically see that there are these 5 kingdoms. We could even go lower than the mineral kingdom if we wanted to, and go into things like atoms and all the different kinds of particles, all the way down to quarks, and now they're trying to find the God particle, etc. This video isn't about that and going into quantum physics, but we could go lower than these kingdoms. And in general, we're not defining much what the spiritual kingdom is here. It's just going to stay kind of vague, especially in this video, because we're focused primarily at finishing the stage of becoming human. But before we can become fully spiritual, according to Bailey's model, we must become fully human, with all the possibilities and difficulties associated with our humanity. So next we read about how the physical body with its aggregates of physical organs and so forth are part of a whole and have to come under the direction of the thinker, which at a higher turn of the spiral is the soul, as the thinker integrates the many parts of the individual. So who is actually coordinating the unit into a whole? It's actually the levels above the human level. And that's the main emphasis there. But you read these things in the Bailey books that sound kind of strange, that the soul doesn't really turn its attention to the human being until it reaches a certain stage of development. It lies in meditation deep, she says, and then it turns from this way to that way and starts to pay attention. You know, if you see these as developmental stages, it makes sense that way. Until we have progressed up to the top of the levels here, like Group 6, we're not going to have a lot of potential to penetrate or unfold into Group 7, Group 8, the levels of the soul, especially Groups 9 and 10, where we're moving into the levels of what she would call spirit or monad. So just get the idea here that there are different kingdoms, and we are trying to move into the 5th kingdom, which is not human, it's spiritual. That's the simple version of all of this. So one of the major things that is part of integration is that process, as already emphasized, of coordination of the emotional or astral nature with the physical body, which takes place in the racial sense in Atlantean times and is going on today among the lower groupings in the human family. It should be the objective of the development of children from ages of 7 to 14. This is actually a quote from one of her books. And why I'm presenting this to you is that this shows the time periods that she said these developmental stages should be taking place. So the Atlantean consciousness covers primarily groups 3, 4, 5, and 6. But this particular phase where the emotional nature is being coordinated with the physical, and you can watch those videos on groups 3, 4, and 5 that I've done, is going on ideally, primarily, she says, with children between the ages of 7 to 14. If there are gaps in development there, and I am preparing some videos about what to do to help heal gaps in groups 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 7, etc. I have to get these videos done first. If there's gaps in development and we've had something traumatic happen and we haven't healed that, modern psychology is calling that shadow work. That's not what she called it. She called it filling in taking care of the cleavages or healing those gaps. Then we are going to have problems as we reach into these higher groups or levels, developmental stages. Coordination of the physical, astral, and mental natures into one blended whole takes place, she says, a little later. This coordination going on rapidly amongst the advanced members of the human family and should be the objective of the training of all adolescents between the ages of 14 and 21. And there's the reference to that, Esoteric Psychology, Volume 2, page 266. So what we're seeing here is ideally, between the ages of 14 and 21, humanity would be moving into Group 6. And in fact, those that are already pretty evolved, that are moving into incarnation in our planet, would recapitulate through these stages pretty fast. So you might see a 14-year-old and you look at that 14-year-old and you think, oh my gosh, that person's already mastered all of these tasks of Group 6. As we go through the video, you might think of some of our youngsters coming in. It feels strange calling them that, young adults coming in, who are already demonstrating Group 6 behaviors and maybe even beyond that at a very young age. But again, she says these are advanced members of the human family. That emphasizes other quotes where she says they're the cream of humanity, etc. And ideally, when humanity reaches a more evolved stage, adolescents will go through the things that we're showing in this video. They'll be fairly powerful people, that's for sure. Now, along with integration within, a lot of you may be surprised to find out, I was when I found the quote, that the integrated personality also has to have integration without. At the same time, this conscious form is slowly arriving at a point where integration into the larger whole becomes desirable and is finally achieved. Again, in the waking consciousness. It's not a fanciful thing. It's something that you prove, you demonstrate. You've done it with thought, with care, in your waking consciousness. Continuing to read your quote. This process of conscious assimilation is carried forward progressively by the gradual integration of the part into the family unit, the nation, the social order, the current civilization, the world of nations, and finally into humanity itself. That is a pretty powerful quote, because when she's talking about who is an integrated personality, it's somebody that has not only done the inward integration, it's somebody who's done the outer integration. That means you are effective in the outer world. This can be a real problem for a lot of spiritual people. I'll try and explain that probably when I get into my Group 7 video, who either have gaps in spiritual development and have tried to skip over the necessary stage of Group 6, which requires, in waking consciousness, the ability to integrate into the current civilization, the world of nations, and humanity itself. So if we are assuming that we are pretty far along and we are not even able to organize our lives, to get along with our family, to integrate into our community, to be effective in our social order, civilization, world of nations, and ideally at this stage, Group 6, humanity, we might be kidding ourselves. We either are assuming we're way farther ahead than we are. Remember, Groups 3, 4, and 5 represent the majority of humanity. This is the cream of humanity. So a lot of spiritual people may actually be at Groups 4 and 5, assuming that they're at Group 7, having skipped over Group 6 because it was too distasteful, perhaps, for them, too much hard work, too much shadow work, have to go back and heal all those cleavages for us to accomplish. So let's not kid ourselves. We either haven't fulfilled this step, or we have a gap in development and need to go back and complete it if we're going to be effective at the higher Groups 7, 8, 9, and especially 9 and 10. Continuing to read her quote, this integration is therefore both physical in nature and an attitude of mind. The consciousness of the man is gradually aroused so that it recognizes this relation of the part to the whole with the implied interrelation of all parts within the whole. And especially as we get into Groups 7, 8, 9, and 10, especially 9 and 10, I don't even know why I'm talking about them. They're so far ahead still. But especially as we get into Group 7 and 8, we have to have a great deal of intelligence to know how to work with the parts and the whole. We can't just have a blanket statement that, we love all of humanity and humanity's all the same. Bailey does not emphasize that kind of thing in her teachings. She emphasizes that we have to have the intelligence to know how to work with the part and the whole, to know how to work with various individual people, individual groups, individual family members, our partners or spouses in a relationship, the members of our community. We can't skip these stages and assume that we're spiritual. We have to learn to do this. This is part of the work, or we will not be effective in Groups 7, 8, 9, and 10 as members of the fifth spiritual kingdom, bringing a new heaven on earth with intelligence, love, and compassion. So again, we have to have that integration within and without. Here's another quote. It will be found that the purely selfish material personality will eventually arrive at that condition wherein the man will be conscious of integrated activity and power because he, one, has developed and integrated his own separative parts into one whole. That's the, you can coordinate your thoughts with your emotions, with your vital body, with your physical body. You know, I have a lot of adventurers in my background. Matthew Perry, who crossed the ocean, Admiral Matthew Perry, and established relationships between the United States and Japan at the founding of the United States of America, is one of my direct descendants. So I love to watch shows about explorers. And recently I was watching The World's Greatest Race. It was extremely hard in watching all these amazing people. So I wish I was young enough to do that kind of thing, who were able to keep their minds really strong, keep their emotions out of it when they were feeling defeated and tired, keep their vital bodies going, and keep those physical bodies, which were so powerful and masterful, as one coordinated unit, one integrated unit, so they could accomplish that amazing, difficult race. This one was in Fiji. I was having so much fun watching it. There's a little bit about me. Anyway, but that is representative of what we're talking about with integrated personalities. They seem amazing to most of us. They seem amazing to most of humanity. And they are the cream of humanity and where we want to be. There are downsides to this and upsides to this, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Here's more of that quote. Because he has studied and used his environment, or the whole of which his personality is but a part, in such a way that it contributes to his desire, his success, and his emergence into prominence. In doing this, he necessarily has had to make some living contribution to the whole in order to evoke its integrating power. His motive, however, being purely selfish and material and objective, can only carry him a certain distance along the path of the higher integration. So there are some words to really stress here in this quote. You have to use the whole of everything you have accomplished in terms of your mental mastery, in terms of your emotional ability to at least suppress those emotions. This group hasn't necessarily mastered their emotions in that they've really analyzed them and looked at them, but they can at least control and suppress them. That you're disciplining your body in such a way that you can use that inward coordination to contribute to your desire, to fulfill your desires, to prove that you can be a success in the world, to emerge into prominence. That's fairly demanding requirement. For me, at least, I think, gosh, you know, we want to again jump and think we're really spiritual, and yet we're not even fulfilling, in her model at least, the requirements. Have we emerged into prominence in the world? Are we making a living contribution to the whole that's asking us to evoke, to bring forth our integrating power? You know, that's why those races are so much fun that I was watching, because it makes people draw from inside of themselves all that they can be to make that happen. Constantly setting those challenges for ourselves, not just hiding out somewhere reading Bailey books, but constantly challenging ourselves so that we can make that contribution by setting those challenges in front of us, whatever they're like. And at first it may be selfish and material and objective. We're going to look at that in this video, that we may just be trying to make a lot of money and have a lot of success and fulfill our desires, which I've talked about in previous videos, for money, security, pleasure, sex, and power. And that's okay. We're going to find out in this video, according to Bailey's model, because it takes you a certain distance along the path of higher integration, which we will talk a little bit more about what that is as we keep going. But the point is, you've got to have that integration within and without in her model, or don't use her model, or don't act like we're following her model and we're not fulfilling its requirements. These are the requirements. So I now want to read more specifically what she says about Group 6. She says, quote, "The souls who think and who are minds. These are steadily increasing in number and gaining in power as our educational processes and our scientific discoveries bring results and expand human awareness. They constitute," here's where that comes from, "the cream of the human family and are the people who are achieving success in some department of human life. They are writers, artists, thinkers in various fields of human knowledge and aspiration, politicians, religious leaders, scientists, skilled workers, and artisans, and all those who, though in the front rank, yet take ideas and propositions and work with them for the ultimate benefit of the human family. They are the world aspirants, and those who are beginning to get the ideal of service into their consciousness." So there's two parts to this, and we're going to talk about that. That's why I have part one, the materialist, and part two, the aspirants. Because when you really look at all of the things that she says about this group, you have to break it into those two parts. But again, are we kidding ourselves? Are we really in the front ranks that we can demonstrate we're in the front ranks? Or are we falling into some of the spiritual difficulties that she herself talks about later on? We have to be clear with ourselves where we're really at, or if we have gaps of development that we need to go back and fill in. So here are those two stages I'm talking about. As we see, Group 6 is still influenced by what Bailey calls Atlantean consciousness, which, as mentioned earlier, is Kama Manasic. That's in my previous videos. Kama is desire, Manasic is mind. The mind is dominated by desire. Kama Manas is part of the emotional plane. Group 6 is on the emotional plane. At the top levels of the emotional plane, but it's on the emotional plane. And it is reaching the heights of becoming what Bailey calls the integrated personality. They are capable of dominating the external world, and that's their main focus. Now, it's true, as we get into Group 7 and 8, that may not be our main focus. That starts with the aspirants. We have first stage 1, the materialistic stage, which is primarily selfish, materialistic, and then the aspirant stage. And we're going to really look at that stage in the next video. Otherwise, you'll be here for way too long listening to this video. But get the idea that there's these two stages. But also get the idea that whether you are in the materialistic stage or the aspirant stage, again, you have to be a front runner. You have to be able to be a success in the world. You know, we can't sit around and have difficulties in relationships and can't hold down a job and can't make any money to feed ourselves. These may happen as part of the path. You know, Nelson Mandela ended up in jail for a while, etc. But we don't use them to defeat us. We use them to continue to be front runners in whatever it is that we are trying to accomplish in the different fields that was listed in the previous slide. So there are primarily three main factors here for Group 6. And I have broken down them as follows. Now, first of all, how do I get to this? I know so many compilations of her material. And so I did a compilation of almost everything that was said about an aspirant. What I do is I cut and paste all that from her online books into a very long database. I read it, I reread it, I highlight it, I bold things, and then I cut and paste and organize into different groupings. This is all was part of my PhD training when I was at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, having to learn how to construct things this way. And I have a pretty organized, systematic mind. So these are the three main things that kept coming up. You know, quotes, repeat, repeat, repeat. And so you kind of can categorize and highlight. First of all, they think and have minds. There's success in all departments of human life. And they're starting to become more scientific. You already saw that in some of the quotes I put into this video. I did that deliberately, so you know I'm not just making these things up out of thin air, that I am following her teachings. But let's go into these three factors in a little bit more depth. Starting with factor 1, they think and have minds. So it's really important because it was something only by doing these extensive compilations that I discovered in going through the Bailey books when I was doing my compilations on mind and what is mind, that there are actually 6 different kinds of mind that Bailey talks about. And I already did this video. You can go watch it. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. But in general, there are instinctual mind, lower concrete mind, and personality mind, which are on the emotional plane. And on the mental plane, which we're not at yet, is lower concrete mind, son of mind, abstract mind. So those of us on the emotional plane in her model, which is again, Kama or Kama monastic, astral means emotional, plane of the emotions, are dealing primarily with instinctual mind, lower concrete mind, personality mind. A lot of people in the Bailey teachings would be surprised to find that there is a lower concrete mind listed on the emotional plane and not just the mental plane. Again, watch that video on the mind, and I'll explain it briefly here because it is important for group 6. So groups 1, 2, and 3 are primarily on the level of instinctual mind. Groups 3, 4, and 5 primarily on lower concrete mind. Concrete mind on the emotional plane is the capacity to observe the outer world and get facts. Concrete mind on the mental plane is actually something different. It is the capacity of the mind to observe the inner world and not the outer world. Concrete mind on the emotional plane is the integrated personality immersed in and attached to the outer world. Remember, the world of the 5 senses. Concrete mind on the mental plane is the soul-infused personality, which is going to be more group 7 and 8, using the mind to detach, observe, and consciously create thought. Groups 5 and 6 are primarily personality mind. Here it is, personality mind. And unlike all the other groups before them, groups 1 through 5, members of group 6 are developing their minds to a much greater degree, operating primarily through what Bailey calls personality mind. They are much more intelligent in their thinking. Now they have abstract reasoning. Abstract mind is not just something that happens on the mental plane. It happens already on the emotional plane. And I talked about that on my previous video on the mind. Bailey states that the personality mind assumes control over the man and leads him to prove the nature of power and of success, and above all else of integration. And there's the quote reference, Raise and Initiations, page 272. In other words, the mind has become so good at instinct, at facts, at coordination, that it can start to dominate the outer world, the inner world and the outer world. And groups 5 and 6 are mostly personality mind. And here we have it again at the top levels of the astral plane. Now this is something I did in the previous video. I was showing how the mind on the emotional plane is coordinated with the findings of the psychologist Piaget. Abstract thinking, we know it's extremely well documented throughout all cultures, pretty much. Happens with children starting at age 12 and goes on through adulthood. So group 7 and 8 are very evolved. There's very few people at group 7 and 8. So the idea that somehow or another, especially groups 9 and 10, when we get up to the abstract levels of mind in the mental plane of Bailey's model, that's when abstract mind kicks in, or we're really using abstract mind, that doesn't make sense. Otherwise, most of humanity would already be there already, because most of humanity can already begin to think abstractly starting at age 12. So what are we talking about then? Well, the personality mind I showed in a previous video in Bailey's model corresponds to some degree with Jean Piaget's formal operations notion. Again, where children around age 12 and into adulthood begin to think abstractly and form hypothetical ideas. Now, most Bailey students consider the abstract mind to be something that unfolds only in the highest levels of the mental plane. But on a closer examination of her model, you're going to see that that's not entirely the case. And I talked about this in the video on the mind. I'm going to stop talking about the mind in just a moment here and get back to the integrated personality. But the integrated personality is using personality mind. They are very capable of thinking abstractly on the emotional plane. Because on the mental plane, it means something more than just learning to think abstractly. What does it mean? Well, on the emotional plane, you're trying to solve abstract questions like, what would life be like if we lived on Mars? Or what will my life look like 20 years from now? On the mental plane, the word abstract can mean abstract thinking, but it means also, and in a way, a lot more, how do I absorb personality tendencies so they are burned up into the consuming fire of God, allowing me to be a demonstration of God as love. That's kind of different idea of how to use the word abstract, and what abstract mind is really trying to do on that plane of the soul and those three higher subplanes of her mental plane. Go back and look at the chart or watch the video on the mind if you want to understand more about what that is about. But for now, let's go back to the characteristics of the integrated personality, especially as it applies to stage 1, where we're more materialistic. So stage 2, the aspirant, is also possessing all these characteristics I'm going to show you in this video. And again, we can't skip stages. We have to all go through these stages. But the aspirant is adding some other characteristics that are a little different than these. It's kind of growing out of some of these tendencies, or adding to these tendencies new characteristics. So think and have minds. Here's a quote. Integrated personalities have the power to use the entire equipment so that the mind and brain function synchronously. Is that a word? Synchronously? And the emotional nature is thereby subordinated, inhibited, or controlled. This involves the steady growth of the power to use thought. So the basic idea is that they are synchronous, in sync, the mind, the brain, the emotions, so that we can subordinate, inhibit, and control the emotions. That's important. It's not that we're learning to understand the emotions and work them through so that we don't have those emotional triggers or reactions at this level. At Group 6, it's that we learn how to compartmentalize or set them aside or stuff them down, whatever we need to do, or explode them in ways where we can try and manipulate other people with them. But we are learning how to use the emotions effectively to get our desires met. Maybe not spiritually, but effectively. That's a big difference. The above, again, is a function of what Bailey calls personality mind, where the mind is increasingly focused, allowing the person to think more rationally and objectively, precisely because they are learning to control, subordinate, or inhibit their emotions, primarily so they can use their minds more effectively to get their desires met. However, because they are still heavily colored by what Bailey calls Atlantean consciousness, even though those in Group 6 can increasingly think, be logical, and be more intelligent, they are still heavily influenced by the things that have to do with the emotional plane, desire, emotional reactions, a focus on the external world more than the internal world. And that's why they often have a lot of stress. And that's why they can resort to Group 4 and 5 kinds of things, where they're into addictive behaviors. And also they can at times break all the way down to Group 3 and get into abusive behaviors if they're not careful, because they haven't really mastered the emotions. They're learning how to work with them in such a way that they can get by through the day before they go to happy hour afterwards, type of thing. For these reasons, as their intelligence grows, that focus on the external world may actually blind them to the higher realms, making them increasingly skeptical of subjective realities. For this reason, they may also reduce all phenomena down to its basic form. For example, they may believe that the brain is the cause of all phenomena and spiritual experiences are just figments of the imagination caused by hallucinations or distortions within the brain. Bailey talks about this kind of thing. This is not a quote from Bailey at the moment. If it's a quote from Bailey, I give you the reference. But she talks about this as a glamour, like, for example, the glamour of God and the machine, etc. This secular, materialistic, atheistic, or agnostic orientation fits with the belief that the only thing that is real is whatever you see with your 5 senses and can demonstrate with concrete facts. Now again, this is a necessary stage. I remember when I went through this stage, when I first got into college, I was like super religious, I guess you could say. And then I started to grow out of it already around 15, actually. And by the time I hit college, my bachelor's degree, I was 18. I was agnostic. I studied other religions besides the Christian religion I grew up in. I'd read 4 different versions of the Bible between age 15 and 18, and a lot of those versions didn't line up. So I was already hitting this stage. This is a necessary stage, this disillusionment with group 4 and 5 ideas of who God is. Now, many group 6 members will act as if God is dead. They'll become not just agnostic, which is what I became, they'll become atheistic. They won't believe in God at all. For those at the materialist stage, this is especially likely. But the nice thing about God being dead is group 6 members are now free, for better or worse, in their own minds to act like gods themselves. I talk about this more extensively in my book, Becoming Human, and I'll talk a little bit about it in this video later on. As for those who still have some belief in a God, those in group 6 tend to think of God in more abstract terms, referring to God more as nature or space or energy or the force or the universe. May the force be with you, kind of a thing. Is actually a sign of group 6 emerging. So is that really a bad thing that they're becoming skeptical? Again, group 6 people are the first ones, according to Bailey, to truly think and have minds. Unlike group 5 people, who are more the enforcers of the existing rules and more inclined to just kind of believe whatever the book says, whatever book it is that they were taught, whether it's the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah, or whatever, the Dhammapada even, whatever book it is, group 5 isn't going to question it. They're going to memorize it. They're going to try and follow it, but they're not going to think. They're not going to question it. That only happens at group 6. They'll read, group 5 will read it. They'll learn basically what it says. They'll take it literally, and then they'll enforce it on others to the best of their ability. Group 6 isn't really like that. They tend to question norms and rules more. They're also more likely to see how arbitrary rules, codes, and even moral ethics can be. That old word, relativism. One reason for this is that the increased development of their minds helps them not to take things literally. Symbolic thinking emerges at group 6. You get a lot better at it later on. We're going to see that they still have their issues, group 6, in just a moment in this video. They also tend to be more open to facts and information than those in group 5. Why is that? Because those in group 5 have probably censored different books, different teachings, different ways of thinking. Group 6 is not inclined to do that as much. They tend to want to examine facts. They want to tend to be more rational and objective. They want to challenge their beliefs. This is a good thing, according to the Bailey model, and I think it is too. Consider the Christian Bible as an example. When group 6 members learned that there are many different versions of the Bible, that was my story, I already told you, and how numerous texts were tossed out of the Bible at the Council of Nicaea in 325, Common Era, they may view the Bible and other sacred texts as being arbitrary and overly influenced by the social and political needs of humans. Did humans just make up all this stuff? Was there really some God that spoke from a bush? Was there really a parting of the Red Seas? Are there really mystical beings who float through the air? These things will be challenged at group 6. Now there's a difference. Group 6, especially at the materialistic stage, will tend to throw those ideas out. They will just not believe in any of it, versus ask deeper questions, which won't happen until you're at least an aspirant, or at least group 7 and 8. Is there another meaning to what this stuff is telling me? And investigate that. So the result, group 6 members begin to develop a healthy skepticism. which Group 5 members do not have, which can be a good or a bad thing, depending on how the skepticism is used. So another thing is they're starting to become more scientific, and the word is starting. The growing capacity to think inclines those in Group 6 to a number of processes that are important in the scientific method. This includes the need to test, prove, and establish reliability so that you can get predictable results. All of this is good and inclines those in Group 6 to want to apply more logic and reason to their view of the world as they test out their assumptions and look to see if their hypotheses and conclusions lead to real results. That's a good thing. And by the way, if we're into the Bailey teachings or into spirituality, and we've thrown our logic and reason out, and we're not trying to test our hypothesis, and we're picking up even a Bailey book and taking it literally, these are Group 5 behaviors. This isn't Group 6, and it's not even what her books say. So if we really want to follow her teachings, we have to keep our logic and reason intact. One of the things, though, with Group 6 is because they're so influenced by Atlantean consciousness. Remember, it's consciousness. I'm not talking about Atlantis somewhere. I'm talking about a consciousness which is primarily emotional and chemomonastic, desire-minded nature. Bailey asserts that those in Group 6 have not yet fully evolved into the true scientific mindset. And I have a quote, and I'll bring that in when I talk about Group 8 in the video, that the true scientific mindset only happens when you reach Group 8, which is equivalent to what she calls accepted discipleship. So what does that mean? That means that those in Group 6 are still prone to a lot of bias in their reasoning and research, slanting them more to what I call scientism than real science. Why? Because they have filters as they look at their evidence. Does the evidence that they see match the desired outcomes they want? Including, is that the outcome that will leverage them in terms of fulfilling their desires by satisfying their particular political party or funder? You know, you can slant at this level. Because if my research disproves what my funders want, where's my paycheck? So you can be biased, you can slant to get your desires met. Or your emotions get in the way. You're not able to see it enough at Group 6. Remember, they're able to inhibit, control, and suppress the emotions. They haven't really worked through them. They haven't really taken the time to analyze and understand them and know what those triggers are. They just know how to hide those triggers well. And they have an external versus internal focus. The investigation is all out there in the world of the 5 senses. It is not about the inner realms. That's a process that's only started, well, we begin it at the aspirant stage of Group 6, but we really only start the scientific process of investigation of the inner realms in Bailey's Group 8 when we become accepted disciples. That's when we begin to really take a scientific approach. That's not when we take a fully adhered to scientific approach. That's when we begin to really take a scientific approach, not only to the outer worlds, but the inner worlds. But it is important that we still have a scientific approach to the outer world as we move into spiritual practice. We're not throwing out our reason, our logic, our mind, our ability to have scientific understanding of the external world. So, another thing that's really important is that Group 6, whether you're the materialistic stage or the aspirant stage, has success in all departments of life. This is the result of becoming an integrated personality, and that can be a really challenging statement, especially if you are used to just assuming you're spiritual and you've skipped all these stages and you haven't even tried to have success in the departments of life or tried to challenge yourself out there in the world and dealt with all the friction of the resistance that the world will throw at you and other people will throw at you. An integrated personality isn't resisting that. That's a wonderful thing. Integrated personality is learning to face it in a good way or a bad way in the way they're handling it. But they are achieving results. So here are some quick little quotes that I have drawn out from some of the compilation that I made. And I've done headers here of the themes. So again, this idea that they have control of their emotions. And I have more quotes than I'm putting in here, but you'd be here forever if I was throwing all the quotes in. So I'm just throwing in a few. They have the power to control the emotions and yet have the full use of the sensory apparatus to sense conditions, to feel reactions, and to bring about contact with the emotional aspects of other personalities. And there's the reference to that. So in other words, you can control your emotions, you can kind of read what's going on with other people so that you can bring about results with others. Now, you may do that in a manipulative way here, especially at Group 6, the materialist stage, can be master manipulators of other people's emotions. So they may be busy suppressing their emotions, knowing that they're feeling really angry and putting on a happy face to try and make you think something different, to manipulate you so they can get the results they want. Or they may be manipulating you into becoming angry so they can get the results they want. But there's a lot more conscious manipulation and understanding of emotions here than we give them credit for. And that's a big part of Group 6. The power to use the entire equipment so that the mind and brain functions synchronously, there's that same quote again, and the emotional nature is subordinated, inhibited, or controlled. This involves the steady growth of the power to use thought. Kind of already summarized this. They have an increased sense of responsibility. They're not hiding out, not taking on responsibility, just reading books somewhere or just enjoying life, whatever. That's more of a Group 4 and 5 thing. They're challenging themselves. They're in that amazing race. They're in the forefront, front runners, remember, of science, of art, of politics, of education, of science. They're the front runners here. And they do that by taking on increased responsibility, not running from it, taking it on. Philosophers, whatever it is, psychologists, they're taking it on. Economists, they're taking on responsibility. That's very important to understand because we can't skip that step. The sense of responsibility and the aptitude to regard the surrounding members of the human family is dependent upon one. Now, you can be in the materialistic stage and you can just mainly do what's good for the people that pay you money and your CEO board, board of your company, etc. It can be selfish. It may not be to really help the whole human family, but you're still taking on responsibility. More than just for your family. If it's just for your family, that's more like Group 5. Or just for a small organization, it's more like Group 5. Remember, the integrated personality is the front runners here. So they are able to be effective, to have an impact, often on the entire human family, as dependent upon one, and they may do that, as we'll see, in a selfish way, especially at this stage, or unselfishly as we move further along. Why do they tend to be selfish? Because they tend to see themselves at this level as the center of the universe. The ability to say, I am, I wish, I desire, I will. They have the consciousness of being in the center of one's tiny universe. Around me, the heavens move and the stars in their courses revolve is the motto of this stage. This is a quote from Bailey. The sense of drama and the capacity to visualize oneself as the center of one's environment. But this is, again, is a necessary stage. They have a purpose-driven life. I borrowed that from that popular book. Her quote, the capacity to live a coordinated life so that the entire man functions and is guided by purpose, expressing the energy of will, by desire, expressing the energy of the emotional or psychic nature, and by vitality, which swings the physical vehicle into line with purpose and desire. In other words, they use the will to make sure that they get results. No excuses. They're going to make it happen. Nick Vujicic, born with no arms, no legs, no excuses, is still going to have an impact on the world around him, for better or worse type of thing. I'm not saying whether his is better or worse. I'm just saying the integrated personality does it for better or worse. But I just love how Nick Vujicic always has that idea of no excuses. You have no arms and legs, you can still go skiing. And I forget, I think he did he surf? I'd have to watch the video again. Water skiing. I mean, it's amazing. This is the amazing part about being an integrated personality, is that we can do these things. And we can admire the others that can do them. They have, to summarize that quote, coordination, a sense of purpose, strong desires. Nothing wrong with strong desires. Doesn't mean you have a six-ray astral body. It means you're an integrated personality. Six-ray astral body comes from the Bailey teachings, and some of them are criticized for having strong emotional desires. Six-ray emotional body. Six-ray tends to have strong desires. Strong desires can mean that you're an integrated personality. And you also have vitality to manifest your purpose. By the way, I found a quote. I didn't put that in here. I'll have to look that up again. That says that a lot of people that are integrated personalities have first-ray astral bodies. I was really surprised to find that. That's what helps them. First ray is will, purpose, and power to suppress their emotions and to have great will so that they can achieve their results. So that might mean that we're going to have a lot more people coming in with first ray, will, purpose, power, astral or emotional bodies. That is a type system. There are 7 different types. They're called 7 rays. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. First ray, which has more of a strong sense of purpose, power, and will. And when it's influencing the astral body, it will tend to really suppress that body. It can also explode it at times. They tend to be very versatile. Quote, the demonstration of many talents, powers, and the working out of genius, and the emphatic bending of the whole personality to the expression of some one of these powers. There's often an extreme versatility and an ability to do many outstanding things noticeably well. Again, are we versatile? Are we able to do many things noticeably well? Others can notice it. It's not just in our imaginations. If so, then we're going through group 6. We're not skipping over it and pretending we're higher along on the spiritual path than we are. They tend to be selfish. Quote, the characteristics of the individual who's beginning to function as a personality might be briefly enumerated as follows. They are simple and clear and preeminently selfish. I think that must have been, they are simply and clear and I cut and paste these from the online books, but to me, it looks like it should read, they are, I'll just leave it as it is. They are simple and clear and preeminently selfish. I don't think they're simple-minded. I think it means that they're simply, clearly, preeminently selfish. Let it not be forgotten that the primitive step on the way to selfhood of necessity is selfishness. Let it be equally well remembered that the prime hindrance to the advanced and highly evolved personality is selfhood, or the prolongation of the selfish attitude. So selfishness is good at first, but when we prolong it too long, when we're in group 6, and don't move into the second stage of group 6, the aspirational stage, where we're being more motivated to serve humanity, that'll be the next video, there's problems. They're prone to narcissism, especially at the materialistic level. The sense of importance. This demonstrates in power and influence, where there is a real and steadily awakening entity behind the persona, and in braggadocio and bombast, where a small selfish creature functions. So we can be an integrated personality. This, by the way, the sense of importance is part of a list that she has of the characteristics of integrated personality. And here she's distinguishing that if we are small within us, that probably means we have cleavages and shadow work inside us we didn't work out as we moved into group 6. Then we're going to be much more likely to have braggadocio and bombast. That's why going back and doing the shadow work is so important, to heal those cleavages at the lower stages. And they tend to have success, and great success, like a lot of success, like more ability to get their desires met than anybody. It's kind of like the 1% type of thing. You know, they've got it all. And what do you do when you get all your desires met? Well, you start to realize That doesn't make you too happy. And you start the spiritual path. But before you get there, you're focused on being an astronomical success, a master of the universe, to use a modern phrase. Quote, when this stage has been reached, the three energies which constitute a personality have been successfully fused. Again, that's the mind, emotions, and the body. The three energies, mind, emotions, and body, have been successfully fused and merged, and the mechanism or instrument of the indwelling self is a usable and valuable asset. That self at first is the integrated personality. The man is a potent personality and becomes the center of a group. He finds himself, or she, but she always talked he, because back then they always said he. He finds himself to be a focal point for other lives and is an influential, magnetic individual, swaying others, coordinating human units into groups and organisms. He becomes the head of organizations and of parties, of religious and political bodies, and of nations in some cases. There you go, forerunners. And why is it that those of us that claim to be spiritual aren't having enough impact on the world? It could be that we're skipping stages or pretending we're farther along than we are. Otherwise, we would be able to have impact at a spiritual level, in a spiritual way. Another quote, the free use of the mind so that focused attention can be paid to all that concerns the personal self and its aims. This spells personality success and prosperity. You know, it's a great thing to feel like you can finally focus your mind. And business people, etc., they can focus their minds a great deal at Group 6. They also tend to have great magnetism. Quote, the physical man is frequently a wonderfully sensitive instrument of the inner emotional and mental selves and gifted with great magnetic power. There is often resilient, though never robust, bodily health and great charm and personal outer gifts. You know, we kind of wonder, how is it that some of those Group 6 people can do what they do and still maintain their physical health? Some of them don't even look very fit. Well, they may not have robust bodily health, but they have magnetism. And we don't understand enough yet scientifically about the role of magnetism in the physical body. You know, others pour energy into us. I like to tell people that at times when things aren't going well, it's because I feel that I'm unplugged. I haven't plugged into enough other people to help stimulate that desire, drive, and will. Well, Group 6 people know how to plug in to a lot of people. They know how to get that energy from others, to magnetize others to them. So they get that energy, or looking at this picture, that fame, or the money that goes with it, or whatever it is they want. They know how to get that, and that helps them have bodily health, even when we look at them and we think that they shouldn't have it because of everything that they're going through, or even their bad eating habits or whatever. They should be dead, you know, but they aren't. Why is that? Magnetism. They have a sense of destiny. Personality is a man with a sense of destiny. Such a man has sufficient willpower to subject his lower nature to such a discipline that he can fulfill the destiny of which he is subconsciously aware. And we're going to talk about the two groups here in a moment, but they all have a sense of, I've got a mission, I've got to accomplish something in the world. And they have the willpower, and they have the coordination of their minds, emotions, and body, and the no excuses, and the magnetism of the energy and the resources of others to get it done, And they fall into two groups. A, those with no soul contact of any kind. Those people are urged forward to their destiny by a sense of power, by self-love, by exalted ambition, by a superiority complex, and by a determination to reach the top of their particular tree. It's because of this quote and some others like it that I've divided these videos in Group 6 into two sections. So this particular A is talking about what I'm calling Group 6, the Materialist. Then there's B, those with a small measure of soul contact. These are people whose methods and motives are therefore a mixture of selfishness and of spiritual vision. Their problem is a difficult one, as their measure of soul contact does bring in an inflow of force, which stimulates the lower nature. even whilst increasing soul control. It is not, however, powerful enough to subordinate the lower nature entirely, and that is Group 6 aspirants. And we'll talk more about what an aspirant looks like in the next video. We're coming to the close of this one here. But you see now why I've divided it into two groups, because even though Bailey in her books doesn't say, here's Group 6 Materialist, here's Group 6 the Aspirants, having done the research, having worked with her books for decades, it's there. You can find it. And what my goal is with these videos is to try and provide you with a structure. I've always told people I'm a structuralist. I used to tell people that all the way back when I was 22, in my first master's program. I'm a structuralist. I like to build structures so that it's easier for people to understand the basic format, and that's what I'm doing here for you. I hope I'm really helping you to provide you with that structure so you can understand this Bailey material a lot easier. So in the previous video, I talked about Group 5, the enforcers, and this is my final slide, that they all have their little groups, and each one believes their group is right. And they use different ways to try and handle other groups that they think are wrong. They can try and get those other people within their group or outside their group to repent and conform and go back to the thinking of their group. Or they can convert those sinners or wrong people out there or the ones in the wrong group into their group. If that doesn't work, they can try and project onto others and say that they are really wrong, and if they don't get right, then they may start to blame them. Well, the reason why the world has problems, or I'm having problems, or my life has problems, isn't because of my failure to integrate my own personality, thoughts, feelings, physical body. It's your fault. Sometimes I joke that we have relationships so that we have people to blame. So that's one of the things that they're doing here. Instead of looking at what do I need to do inside, which Group 6 people will do. Now they may use blame as well as a strategic tactic, especially here as a materialist. But it's going to be a deliberate tactic and not so much a reflex. Then they will build barriers like walls, or they'll try and suppress and control. Or if that doesn't work, they'll resort to violence, just kill the people they don't want off. Or they'll kill themselves off if they resort to despair. And I ended that video saying these are the options that Group 5 are faced with, but what happens when these options aren't working so well? Now, Group 6 may manipulate Group 5 and Group 4 and Group 3. There's hardly any Group 1 or 2 people on the planet, so says Bailey. It's hard for me to verify that or not. It seems likely that there aren't. But Group 6 may manipulate Groups 5, 4, 3, and their tendencies. Group 3 towards abuse or being abused. Group 4 towards addiction. Group 5 towards kind of OCD, anal behaviors, trying to enforce other people to be a certain way. But Group 5, the reason I'm putting this in here, has a problem. Is there another solution besides all of these in your evolution? There is. Evolve into Group 6. What does that possibly look like? Here's my ideas. First of all, it's really important to understand that Group 6, like Groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is on the path of individuation. That means they're working on becoming an individual. And Group 6 has it down. And the emphasis on being an individual is more important than ever before. Group 5, well, tribal consciousness in the Bailey system starts with Group 3 and reaches its height at Group 5. And it actually tends to fall apart at Group 6. Because Group 6 is learning to care more about the individual than the group. So as Group 5 members move into Group 6, they also switch from those who enforce the rules to those who start to create them. I mean, if I become a god myself, because I have enough I'm a one percenter. I have enough money. I have my billions. I make the rules now. And if God is dead and God doesn't exist, well, then I start to have a crisis in conscience. I mean, then who's God? And if I'm a master of the universe, if I'm God, then who's making the rules? Well, I am. Well, then rules are meant to be broken. But as Group 5 moves into Group 6, that's a crisis because they've spent so much time believing in that one book or enforcing the rules of what that authority figure told them was true. And now they're seeing that it might not be true. And that's hard to swallow at first. Take religion, for example, and the crisis of discovering that the holy books you invested so much of your emotional energy in and even chastise others for not having followed carefully enough have been altered, or maybe they were entirely made up. What happens to your mortal soul if you suddenly discover that those above you who you trusted and believed in, the Group 6 gods, are corrupt, full of hypocrisy, and breaking many or most of the rules that you so carefully followed and made others adhere to? What do you do with that crisis in your consciousness? How do you reconcile it? The crises and confusion at first must be very difficult to handle. What do you do? Self-destruct during this existential crisis? It was kind of shown you in the previous slide. Transform, perhaps by going through a period of secularism, agnosticism, or even atheism as you try to cope with all this new relativism. Well, never fear. Group 6 has found a way out. And in fact, it's a way that is influencing Group 6 people all over the world. For some in the past decades, there has been one solution. Replace your old god with a new goddess to help you on your journey. And her name is Ayn Rand. You see, whether many people know it or not, she is an intellectual whose ideas are greatly influencing many, many people in power today. When I looked it up, I was amazed, and I'm going to share some of that with you, how many people are following the philosophies of Ayn Rand. In fact, Rand's book, The Fountainhead, is in many ways, in my opinion, Group 6's new Bible. Here's the new Bible. Here's the new good book. It can also be Atlas Shrugged, but this was the first one, The Fountainhead. For starters, the main characters in Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead is Howard Rourke, or the main character, who we would say begins his life in Group 5. At first, afraid to let go of the rules and norms of the society he is part of, Rourke breaks free of them. He is then able to shift his life out of poverty into one of wealth. By rejecting the societal norms around him, Rourke becomes free to think his own thoughts, determine his own path, live by his own rules, and follow his own made-up code of ethics. This allows Rourke to become a self-made man who achieves a great deal of financial and creative success. To use Alice Bailey's words, Rourke becomes an integrated personality. And this is really fascinating for me. Now, Bailey passed away in the 1940s, Ayn Rand in the 1980s. So I don't even think Ayn Rand knew about Bailey. I don't think Bailey knew about Ayn Rand. She wasn't that influential yet. But Ayn Rand's philosophy is so in sync with what Bailey says about Group 6 and the integrated personality, especially at the materialist stage. It was really fascinating for me to pull these together. And that's why I'm pulling it together for you. So Howard Rourke is that Group 5 guy who's following the rules. Kind of like some of our politicians in crisis right now. They were following the rules, and now suddenly we're wondering, why are they throwing all those rules out? What's happening to them? What's going on with them? Well, they're adopting the Group 6 philosophy of the materialist stage that Ayn Rand represents so well. Forget about the rules. Break them. Become your own self-made man or woman. Just live by your own desires. Lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. And in a way, who cares who gets hurt on the way up? That's just like Alice Bailey's integrated personality at the materialist stage. She even talks about how they can become dictators. And she even mentions some dictators. They can become Mussolini or the Pope, she says in one particular phrase. And in that same quote, she says that that's all part of the stage. It's not like we should sit there and lament that this is happening. It's that we should become aware that this is happening. And then if we really think we're spiritual people, how can we integrate our own personalities in such a way that we can have true influence in the world at a group 7, 8? Not very likely we're 9 and 10, but 7 or 8 level. So let's take a look at Ayn Rand's philosophy, because it parallels what Alice Bailey says a great deal about the materialistic stage. So what to me is most remarkable about the Fountainhead is how Rourke handles the anxieties many Group 5 people face when they break society's rules. In short, Rourke decides it's only logical and reasonable to break the rules. It's something that thinking people do. Selfishness is a good thing. It represents a stage of evolution. And according to Bailey, it does. Rourke's logic turned into a philosophical system by Ayn Rand known as Objectivism. Notice that. You objectify because you're so focused on the individual. You're so focused on the world of the 5 senses that you are basically seemingly rational and logical, but still within Bailey's model, within Atlantean consciousness, you're still chemomonastic, you're still desire mind, you're at the stage of personality mind. And the problem with objectivism is that it ignores the deeper spiritual realities of our interdependence with everyone and everything on this planet that is only realized in Bailey's model factually by those moving beyond Group 6. And I put in the word factually deliberately. It's not a fanciful thing that something Group 4 and 5 is going to come up with. It's factual. Integrated personalities see the notion of interdependence like some Group 5 fictional religious storyline that is used to prevent people from being all they want to be and getting all their wishes fulfilled. Those are the sheeples. Even Bailey uses with Group 5 a quote that says they're like the sheep. That's similar to something Ayn Rand would say. Yes, logically, even Group 6 members can look at the picture of planet Earth and realize how all human beings live with independence. And I guess I need to re-plug in my microphone. Is that? Okay, let's hope that that goes away. Well, there it's going. And now you know I use a microphone blue snowball. Okay. So back to this. And they will tend to see the earth as a dead thing, not as a living thing that we live, move, and have our being inside of. It's just stuff out there to be exploited. And that's also why they are too materialistic and separative to see that interdependence. And why they glorify books like The Selfish Gene. I remember reading that book when I was 18. I still have my notes. I reread my penciled notes when I was 18 as I was arguing with his points. It was kind of fun as I was doing this video. Anyway, by famous atheist Richard Dawkins, that says humans are programmed to be selfish. So essentially just get used to it. And in a way, even in the Bailey model, there's some truth to that. According to her model, if it's true, this is the next stage of our evolution. So now let's look at some quotes from Ayn Rand. First of all, I am, I think, I will. That is so interesting. And in just a moment, I'm going to put up Bailey's quote from one of her books that we actually already looked at, but you'll remember it. That's almost the same exact words about Group 6 and what they'll say. Kind of fascinating. Man, every man is an end in himself, not a means to the ends of others. He must live for his own sake, neither sacrificing himself to others nor sacrificing others to himself. He must work for his rational self-interest with the achievement of his own happiness as the highest moral purpose of his life. That's a quote from Ayn Rand. Your own happiness is the highest morality, highest moral purpose of your life. So whatever makes me feel good, that's the moral thing to do. Now, there is another thing in this quote, neither sacrificing himself to others nor sacrificing others to himself. So there is a a little bit here in her philosophy of kind of a Group Six aspirant, being good to others, thinking about others, but just a little bit here. Achievement of your own happiness is the only moral purpose of your life, kind of re-saying that again. And that happiness, not pain or mindless self-indulgence, is the proof of your moral integrity, since it is the proof and the result of your loyalty to the achievement of your values. So a Group Six person knows what they value, they know their own minds, they adhere to their principles. And that's the proof of your moral integrity. And again, that's not all bad. There's some good stuff in there, you know, and some stuff that at the higher levels would be a little questionable. Achievement of your own happiness is the only moral purpose. But then she says, we don't want pain. Well, nobody wants pain. But then in the higher spiritual disciplines, we're always going to have pleasure and pain. And we learn instead how to have equanimity. It's kind of a higher value. But we don't want mindless self-indulgence either. She's not advocating self-indulgence to the nth degree in that quote. There are some ways that I think some of what she says is being distorted by Group Six types. Now, this is another thing that she had a phrase called the collective. The collective was Ayn Rand's private name for a group of close confidence students and proponents of Rand and Objectivism during the 1950s and 60s. And among these individuals was Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve. So many people like to say, it's the Masons that are part of the deep state. Well, could it be that it's the collective that believes in these philosophies of Ayn Rand? And is that a bad thing? If it's part of an evolutionary stage that even Alice Bailey's teaching says we got to go through? Here's her quote, Alice Bailey, the ability to say, I am, I wish, I desire, I will. Look how close that is. But she says, Bailey says, that there's distinctions in the I am. There is the I am, and I'm paraphrasing in this section here. You can go read the exact quote in page 393 of A Treatise on White Magic. It was too long, so I'm paraphrasing. There's the I am, which is the cry of the human being, she says. Then there's the I am that, which is the cry of the personality expressing their will. So when Ayn Rand says I am, in the Bailey teachings, it's the I am that. And then there is the I am that I am, which she says is the cry of the individual soul realizing one with the soul or self of all. Realizing they are one, the soul or self of all. Here's another quote by Ayn Rand. If any civilization is to survive, it is the morality of altruism that men have to reject. She was not keen on altruism, which is something that a lot of people have questioned, but yet it fits with Group Six Materialist. And it also fits with the fact that she is a Russian immigrant that came to the United States. And if you studied the history of Russia, which I have from Peter the Great, and what he did to the Russian people and how much serfdom, which was like white slavery going on over there forever. And then what happened with Stalin and Lenin, and I myself a long time ago read Marx's books, had to when I was in my bachelor's degree in college. When you read these things, you then understand that what's going on in Russia and China and a lot of these countries, including our own right now as I'm doing this, that are moving towards dictatorship, is this idea that the individual is everything. And we shouldn't be altruistic towards each other. The individual is like the survival of the fittest, kind of Darwinism, that if you are an individual who is integrated and can dominate and can take what you want from the world, then you have every right to do that. And you don't need to be altruistic. In fact, she even at one point calls it evil. Here's another quote of hers. Every man builds his own world in his own image. He has the power to choose, but no power to escape the necessity of choice. You must choose. You must shape your reality. You create your reality. Sound familiar? Kind of similar to the Ayn Rand philosophy. But you must choose. You must decide to build the world in your own image. Group 6, materialistic stage. Do you know that my personal crusade in life, in the philosophical sense, is not merely to fight collectivism, nor to fight altruism? These are only consequences, effects, not causes. I am out after the real cause, the real root of evil on earth, the irrational. So in this quote, I see a few things. First of all, when you study the history of Russia, and they've never really practiced socialism over there. They've practiced dictatorship. They've practiced where the elite managed to steal everything from Group 4, Group 5 people and convince them to have nothing, while those in Group 6, the dictators, got to indulge in everything, the oil cartel, etc. So Ayn Rand saw that hypocrisy. She saw that, what happened if you were like her hero in The Fountainhead, if you were a sheeple, if you were a sheep, and how you got stepped on, enslaved, if you weren't smart, if you didn't think, if you didn't discard irrational beliefs and become rational and reasonable and grow out of Groups 4 and Group 5 and Group 3, which again is a good thing with problems when you look at it from higher levels. The question isn't who is going to let me, it's who is going to stop me. Inspiring, says Sandra Bullock. I found some quotes from different celebrities that are really following her teachings. Ayn Rand, I'm not primarily an advocate of capitalism, but of egoism. And she means that not, as Bailey uses the word ego, as equivalent to soul. Ayn Rand means that as selfish, separative, integrated personality, Bailey would say. I am not primarily an advocate of capitalism, but of egoism. And I am not primarily an advocate of egoism, but of reason. If one recognizes the supremacy of reason and applies it consistently, all the rest follows. And in a way, we can agree with that. It's just in Bailey's model, we don't really get into being rational and reasonable until we get into Group 8. And there's a lot of ways that those in Group 6 are kidding themselves that they're following reason. As I showed you in a previous slide, they're a lot into scientism. They're a lot into manipulating things because they're still Atlantean consciousness on the astro-emotional plane to meet their own needs, even though that's not logical, that's not reasonable. But, we can bend the rules here and there. Quote by Ayn Rand, "What is greatness? I will answer. It is the capacity to live by the 3 fundamental values of John Galt: reason, purpose, and self-esteem." All 3 words used by Alice Bailey to describe Group 6. Atlas Shrugged is the greatest motivator for the individual that I can imagine. Rob Lowe. Got to start asking, how is this philosophy serving a lot of these people? I had a friend that once asked me, "Hey, Lisa, how's that working for you?" And I like that phrase because a lot of people are following this philosophy. How's it really working for you? Is it really bringing you the happiness that Ayn Rand proposes that it will? Or has it done what is one of the problems of Atlantean consciousness on the emotional plane? Focus on the realm of the 5 senses, on stuff, on money, security, pleasure, sex, and power. Did it really bring you the happiness that you think? We have people that have all the money, all the security, all the pleasure, all the sex, all the power, to the trillionth degree, and they're miserable. We can all see it. So does this philosophy really deliver what Ayn Rand says it's going to? That's something Group 6 has to go through that stage on its own, each and every one of us, to find out. It's not something to be judged. It's something to be understood. The smallest minority on earth is the individual. Those who deny individual rights cannot claim to be defenders of minorities. See how that's influencing things? As I'm doing this, the whole video, the whole Black Lives Matter thing is going on. But it's the right of the individual that matters more than the right of some group or some collective. We have to be careful of the collective, according to Ayn Rand. They're going to trample on our rights. Well, that's true in dictatorships where the rights of primarily groups 3, 4, and 5 are being trampled on or manipulated or taken away, and they're too dumb to even see it. They're too irrational. They're not reasonable enough to see how they're being manipulated. And by the way, there are lots of quotes I found. I just didn't have time. I'm going to put that in another video that I'm going to do after Group 6 Aspirant. I'm going to do a fun video I've already got going about the light and the dark side between the Group 6 Materialist and Group 6 Aspirants, because Bailey has a lot of quotes where she talks about the dilemmas that can happen here, and the arc of going to the light or dark side is going to happen here. And that's because I believe in my own individual rights, and it's true at one level. I don't want to be a stupid sheep that's following things blindly. I want to be reasonable. I want to be scientific. But we see COVID-19 is going on when I'm doing this video. Just the argument over mask. You know, there are people that are saying, it's my individual right not to wear a mask, even though that may be irrational. I've had 2 people I know die. 10 of my clients have had people that have died. One was 17, one was 2. I've had my best girlfriend get sick and have her chest cut open to get rid of the fluid out of her lungs. So maybe I'm just a little bit more aware. I've had nurses from New York City call me because I'm a counselor that has people from all over the world call me. And both of them were afraid they were going to die. One got COVID and got very, very sick, came out of it, let me know she was okay. The other never answered my phone calls. Is that rational? So we don't want to be irrational. Ayn Rand's right. And there are ways that she's also irrational. And we see that going on as well. Man's unique reward, however, is that while animals survive by adjusting themselves to their background, man survives by adjusting his background to himself. And unfortunately, that can mean irrationally, there's an illogical logic here, manipulating the background to suit your own scientism. Ask yourself whether the dream of heaven and greatness should be waiting for us in our graves, or whether it should be ours here and now on this earth. So again, the materialistic tendency to have all you can out of what the earth can give you, which makes sense again to a point. When we get to Group 7, it's going to get a lot clearer. Group 7 is really different than Group 5. Ayn Rand is arguing about the problems of Group 5 and trying to get us into Group 6. And again, we all need to go there. And there's really good points to what she's saying. And some of it doesn't see far enough, which we'll do in later videos. Now, I don't care to discuss the alleged complaints American Indians have against this country. I believe with good reason the most unsympathetic Hollywood portrayal of Indians and what they did to the white man. They had no right to a country merely because they were born here and then acted like savages. Had to put that one in. There's worse ones about Arabs, about Native Americans. I didn't find any about blacks. But I put that in there deliberately because this is representative of the challenges that we're facing as humanity, the cream of humanity, moves into Group 6. Ayn Rand's inspired me so much that it's required reading in my office for all my interns and my staff. Paul Ryan. These quotes highlight the way Group 6 people strive to live until they get to the aspirant level. What I'm trying to, by quotes, I mean the quotes that have been throughout this video. What I'm trying to reveal here is not whether it is a right or wrong way to live your life. No matter what our initial reaction to Rand's quotes might be, we need to remember that Group 6 represents the next step in evolution. They're the first group to develop a larger measure of mind. There is value in being able to think with more of a critical, rational, reasonable mind. So more people that have been highly influenced by Ayn Rand. Len Beck, Fox News. Sean Hannity, Fox News. Ron Paul, Fox News. Here's another person, highly influenced by Ayn Rand. So much so, because the main character, Rourke, had orange hair. And I don't know when this book cover came out. Did it come out before Donald Trump started combing his hair like that? I don't know. Did it come out after to kind of imitate Donald Trump? You can go find that one out for yourself. But he admits that he's a big follower of Ayn Rand and tries to model himself after Rourke. He sees himself as the character of Rourke. And some say that he has modeled his orange hair after that as well. I don't know if that part's a fact or fiction. The problem as I see it, winding down this video, is that this mind that Group 6 integrated personalities possess is still karma monastic. Their minds are still oriented towards karma or desire. They just are better able than most to have most of their money, pleasure, power, desires fulfilled. Eventually, they will learn through the fulfillment of those desires that philosophies like Rand's are not all they're cracked up to be. How's it really working for them? Are they really getting all that happiness? Or are they kind of emotionally miserable? Which brings me to what I call illogical logic. I'd like to bring in a person, Nathaniel Branden. God bless Nathaniel Branden. Ironically, despite all her efforts to promote happiness, especially at the expense of others, Ayn Rand herself ended up her life depressed, bitter, and mostly alone. How did it work for her, that philosophy? One particularly upsetting part of her life was when Nathaniel Branden, her real-life, much younger lover, who was a lot like her character of Howard Rourke in The Fountainhead, and who was the direct inspiration for her book Atlas Shrugged, left her and married another woman much closer to his age. Wikipedia states that, quote, Rand published an article in The Objectivist repudiating Nathaniel Branden for dishonesty and other irrational behavior in his private life. Branden later apologized in an interview to every student of Objectivism for perpetuating the Ayn Rand mystique, which means he bailed on it, even though he was the role model for it, and for, quote, contributing to that dreadful atmosphere of intellectual repressiveness that pervades the Objectivist movement. So her very role model left the movement. Branden later went on to write a number of best-selling books on self-esteem and even became part of the integral movement. And I highly recommend the audio series Atlas Evolved, since he's basically Atlas Shrugged. He's basically the main person that she based her philosophy on. Atlas Evolved, The Life and Loves of Nathaniel Branden, found through Integral Life. I highly recommend that you go get that. It was a wonderful listen. How strange, however, that Branden was vilified by Rand for simply exercising the courage and will to live the life he wanted, something which is at the very core of Rand's teachings. And is it so illogical that somebody who is substantially younger might want to marry a woman his age or throw out age? Is it illogical to want to be with somebody you love? How's that working for you, this philosophy, materialistic, Group 6? They'll evolve too as they get into the aspirant stage. Here she is in the later years of her life. For me, Rand's reaction proves that despite how Group 6 people may profess to live according to logic and reason, they're still heavily colored by desire, emotion, and a focus on the external world for their own happiness. How ironic that Rand, who promoted objectivism, didn't have the objective capacity to look at her own emotional reactions to Branden wanting another woman than her. Instead of seeing, I already said this, that it might be logical and reasonable for a man substantially younger than her to want a woman closer to his age, or to want another woman, period, than her. Maybe he just didn't want her anymore. That can be logical. Sorry, I'm ranting a little bit. Rand turned into the stereotypical vindictive and highly emotional scorned woman. I was kind of disappointed to see that because there are some things I really admire about her. She even acted as a Group 5 rule enforcer would, attempting to ostracize Branden. She kind of dropped down. She had a Group 5 cleavage and she dropped down trying to enforce her rule book, The Fountainhead, which Branden was following. He was Atlas Shrugged. He was shrugging it off, doing what he wanted to do. Good for him. Oh, jeez. Rand also ended up nearly broke at the end of her life, and despite her constant criticism of entitlement programs that inspired many others, even today, to dismantleism, she was part of Reaganomics. Remember, we have a lot of people at the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, others following her philosophy. We should not have entitlement programs. Even our president of the United States today, Donald Trump, we should not have Medicare. We should not have Social Security. Throw it out. If you didn't get there by your own bootstraps, that's your problem. You're just not as evolved as the rest of us are, who are part of the Darwinism survival of the fittest. But the irony is, in the end, Rand ended up using those same entitlement programs herself, Social Security, Medicare, to survive. And there's a wonderful thing, but I didn't put it in here. I was going to put the discussion that I found online between the quotes from the social worker about how she finally convinced Ayn Rand that she needed these things to exist. I used to do home health. I used to go in San Diego County into the homes of all kinds of people 70 and above. And I cannot tell you how many of them did the right thing. And yet, due to circumstances beyond their control, like the pension program suddenly disappeared, the corporation suddenly dissolved, these people who did the right thing ended up having to survive on entitlement programs. And yet I would run into people who literally, I knew for a fact, and they were all sick, that's why I was there, would be homeless on the streets. And I did have to go visit some homeless people on the streets in my job. But they would be homeless on the streets if it was not for those liberal entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare. Some of them had to put on food stamps, or the SNAP program, it's now called, etc. You know, I mean, and yet, even though they were on those programs to survive, they still would not admit that maybe these entitlement programs were necessary. So, in the end, Rand died of heart failure on March 6, 1982, and her funeral was attended by some of her prominent followers, including Alan Greenspan, and this part just cracked me up. A 6-foot floral arrangement in the shape of a $sign was placed by her casket. There's her tombstone. So Rand's illogical logic is characteristic of those in Group 6, at the materialist stage especially, who still reside on the emotional plane. Too often their increased logic and reason is still used to justify their emotional impulses and selfish desires and behaviors. Having said this, there is a reason both Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged remain some of the most popular books in the world. I looked it up. Look it up yourself. You'll be amazed to see how many people have this as their new Bibles. Rand gave voice and purpose to the Group 6 thrust of human evolution. As Group 6 types emerge, we have to do our best to ensure they won't cause, however, too much destruction before they are able to fountain their way up onto the higher evolutionary scale, which will lead me to our next slide in a moment. Here we go. And that is, I'm going to do a whole video on this, I decided, that they could end up on the dark side of the Force. Here's another quote from Alice Bailey. Personality is a completely integrated human being. In this case, we have a man whose physical, emotional, mental natures can be fused and can subsequently function as one. We've heard this kind of thing before. And thus produce a mechanism which is subordinated to the will of the personality. Will is very important here, but it's like strong will. To use a phrase from a book by Roberto Saggioli, An Act of Will. He was one of Bailey's students. This can take place with or without a definite soul contact. And it is at this stage that there comes a predisposition to the right or to the left-hand path, the dark side of the Force. And again, I'm going to do a whole video on that using some of our popular movies. Dune, which is a series I was fascinated with when I was young, The Lord of the Rings, and Star Wars, and a little bit of Star Trek in that video to talk about how Bailey would see the right and left-hand paths. One point should be noted, and upon this point, aspirants should exercise care. This is a quote from Alice Bailey. The usual connotations of the word spiritual growth is largely that of religious growth and understanding. A man is deemed spiritual if he is interested in the world's scriptures, if he is a church member, and if he lives a saintly life. But this is no true definition, for it is not sufficiently comprehensive. She's talking about Group 5 kinds of people here. It has grown out of the impress set upon human thought and terminologies by the Piscean age, and through the influence of the sixth ray and the work of the Christian church, all most necessary and all inherent in the great plan, but which, divorced from their eternal context, lead to an overemphasis on certain divine expressions and overlooking of other as vital manifestations of divine consciousness. Let's keep reading, then I'll summarize. We're coming to the very end of this whole thing. The true significance of the word spiritual growth is far wider and more inclusive than their manifestation through the medium of religious and mystical literature and organizations for the imparting of metaphysical truth. Power, purpose, and will are all divine qualities and expressions. Oh, here's that quote I talked about earlier, Mussolini and Pope. I did put it in. Power, purpose, and will are all divine qualities and expressions and show themselves with equal clarity through a Mussolini or through a Pope. In both cases, the mechanism of expression modifies and steps down the qualities and serves as a handicap. The outstanding characteristics of those personalities who are not as yet soul-centered or controlled are dominance, ambition, pride, and a lack of love to the whole, though they frequently possess love for those who are necessary to them or to their comfort. So there's some really interesting things here. And that is, group 5 is just going to, again, in Bailey's model as well, and this kind of fits with what Ayn Rand disagrees with. They're going to blindly follow world scriptures. And when she says, is a church member and lives a saintly life, she doesn't mean a true saint. She means, just trying to follow the rules and then do good here without really thinking. Because Alice Bailey agrees, we need to learn to think. We need to learn to reason. Now, when she says things by Piscean age and sixth ray, that is her way of saying that these people are overly influenced by belief without reason or thought. Later, you combine belief, reason, thought. There's a higher level of mysticism that Bailey talks about, especially in her book, Letters on Occult Meditation. But you have to combine both. At this stage, they're not combined. It's primarily belief without real thought, without real reason, irrationality without rationality. But there's a higher level to spirituality than simply what Group 6 sees. And that's the difficulty here. That's what can lead to the dark side of the force if we're not clearly aware of these distinctions. But I like that she says power, purpose, and will are divine qualities and expressions. They can go in the direction of a Mussolini, or they can go in the direction of a pope that's being a good pope, you could say. They can be used for better or worse. They can be used for dominance, ambition, pride, and be directed through a lack of love to the whole, while still taking care of the ones you love nearby, that love you, tell you you're wonderful, kiss your you-know-what. Then you can love them. This is part of the dilemma of the dark side that we have to look at. But it's also an acknowledgement, again, that this is a stage of human evolution that we have to become alert and awake to. And as I see it, even though this stuff was written almost 100 years ago, she seems right on to me. It seems to be playing out right before our eyes, this stuff. And even our cultural myths of, Star Wars and Dune and Star Trek and Lord of the Rings, these blockbuster films, this stuff is playing out right in front of us. So here we are, coming to the very end finally. The dark side begins when the individual with his or her newfound powers starts to put too much emphasis on the selfish and materialistic qualities of the integrated personality. The light side begins when the integrated personality becomes an aspirant seeking to do humanitarian work, but is only beginning to step on to a dedicated spiritual path. And we will talk more about that in future videos. So as you know, I always wrap up with a really quick kind of, because I like integral, and originally this whole thing started as me doing something called Wisdom versus Wilbur. We're trying to look at the ageless wisdom versus integral models. This is actually getting harder and harder to do at Group 6, but I'll make a few comparisons. In a way, it fits in with orange, with the integral model. The difficulty is, which I'll show in a moment, is that the Bailey model has a lot more to say about this stage and splits it into these two different sections. But in a way, those are where some of the comparisons can be made. They are more rational, world-centric. Those things are similar to what Bailey is saying. They have more formal operations as well when we look at this over here. They're more personality mind, Bailey calls it. That's what's similar to formal operations in the integral model. But the problem is, from here on out, things are really going to break down. And I'm going to do my best to present the Bailey model more and more because it doesn't neatly fit with the integral model anymore. In fact, honestly, just before I was doing this video, this very chart that you see here, I had to change it because I realized that integral teal, turquoise, indigo, and violet are really more along the lines of group 7 and a little bit into group 8 in the Bailey model. So I had to squish all this down. They're not going to go as far up. They're all going to be squished down into right about this level here now. So I'm not going to put much more focus on integral from this way out because they're just not lining up as much. But in conclusion, some of the group 6 and orange differences in the integral model are: the first phase of Bailey's group 6 may have scientific leanings, but her model shows how they are prone to scientism and illogical logic, my phrase, because they are still too dominated by desire, emotion, and the focus on the realm of the 5 senses to truly be scientific and logical. And you don't see this kind of emphasis on emotions and desire and kama manas and the 5 senses in the integral model. Group 6 and orange differences as well is that the first phase of Bailey's group 6 emphasizes more how selfish and materialistic they can be than the integral model accounts for. And the integral model does not really account enough for this selfishness and skips the notion of temptation also that can lead towards dictatorship and the dark side of the force. In fact, I have to catch up with integral and see if they've changed it. But originally, when the problems with Trump are coming out, they were saying that he's group 3. Well, that wouldn't fit. I mean, not group 3, he's red in the integral model, which is similar to Bailey's group 3. But as I've said in that video on red group 3, that you can go watch, Bailey's group 3, group 3 is like a Bonnie and Clyde that goes out in a blaze of bullets in a couple of years after they start. It's not like the characters I've illustrated in this particular video. So this is the end of the video. And I really hope that it's helped give you a lot of food for thought. It's been fascinating for me to dig into the Bailey model and to propose to you, or to show to you, reveal to you the propositions that she has that are similar to what we are actually seeing unfold in front of us. So I'm going to stop here. You've been with me, I know, for far too long. If you want to support this work, I ask you to do this, please, because I am doing this all as a service right now. At some point, I may take these videos off and put them into a video course. That's still a long ways away. This is a tremendous amount of work. So if you like, at least subscribe to this channel if you're enjoying what you're seeing so that you can be aware when new videos come out. But even more so, I really would appreciate it if you would become a patron. I do have some gifts for you if you do, to support this work, and you can go to that link there to do that. Thank you so much for hanging in there, even if you had to come back 2-3 times to stop and start this video, and we'll see you next time.